The Iraq War, also known as the Gulf War II, was a part of the global war on terrorism. It was a brutal war that lasted from 2003 to 2011. It was fought between the Iraq military, the Taliban, NATO, ISIS, and a group of countries America deems as the axis of evil. Most battles took place in Iraq, Kuwait, Afghanistan, Iran, and other countries in the Middle East. The Iraq War was a turning point in history because it led to widespread destruction and death in these nations and changes in their regimes. It was also the start of America's peacekeeping operations and fighting against terrorism in the world, along with slowly getting rid of ISIS.
One of the main reasons of the Iraq War was 9/11, when Al-Qaeda, a Sunni-planned Islamic terrorist force, famously hijacked 4 planes and crashed them into the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and tried to hit the Capitol building, but the passengers heroically saved the plane and crashed it into a Pennsylvania field. ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, was then formed. Al-Qaeda inspired them, but they eventually split off. They have a violent ideology and claim superiority over all Muslims. Al-Qaeda is a military organization led by Salafi jihadists who self-identify as a global revolution to unite the Muslim world under a national Islamic state known as the Caliphate. Al-Qaeda is responsible for 6 major attacks, with the most notable being 9/11. The US immediately went to the Taliban, assuming they were harboring Al-Qaeda. When they refused to give up Osama and his top associates, the US went to war with Afghanistan. With the help of the Afghan Northern Alliance, they managed to remove the Taliban government. The Iraq War was a fight between the US and, you guessed it, Iraq that went on between 2003 to 2011. This war first began with the US joining the United Kingdom, Australia, and Poland in launching a shock-and-awe bombing campaign. When WMD, weapons of mass destruction, intelligence pulled illusory and a violent insurgency rose, the war lost public support. Saddam was captured, tried, and hung, and democratic elections were held. This was a costly war, and over 100,000 Iraq and 4,000 American lives were lost. Another thing that happened because of this war is that it encouraged and motivated high-ranking Iraq soldiers to join forces with terrorist organizations. One of these terrorist organizations were ISIS, or ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant.
One of the effects of this war in the global war on terror is the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act helps efforts of counterterrorism in the U.S. Some of the main effects of the Patriot Act are that it allows law enforcement to use surveillance against more crimes of terror, it allows federal agents to follow sophisticated terrorists trained to evade detection, it allows law enforcement to conduct investigations without tipping off terrorists, and it allows federal agents to ask a court for an order to obtain business records in national security terrorism cases. Another major effect of this war is the changes to TSA after 9/11. The major changes were things such as people who only have tickets to fly that day would be allowed past security, you would not be able to have sharp objects in your carry-on luggage, and vehicles could only pull up curbside for active loading or unloading. The last major effect in Iraq from this war is the effect on the Iraqi people. Ever since the invasion and occupation of Iraq by the US in 2003, the mental health of Iraqi people has been shattered. Sources also say that since the invasion, many people in Iraq have been internally displaced. In 2003, the number of internally displaced people was 0, but it quickly rose in 2007 to 2.6 million. By the time the Iraq War ended in 2011, the number of internally displaced people had decreased to 1.3 million, which is better but still a horrible number compared to 2003. With the rise and fall of ISIS/ISIL from 2013 to 2019, the number of internally displaced people rose really quickly, peaking in 2015 to 4.4 million. Luckily, it has gone down since then, and in 2022, there were a recorded 1.2 million internally displaced people. This number is still horrible compared to before the invasion, and it's truly unfortunate, but the US is not exactly known as being a friendly country.
The Iraq War, a part of the war against terrorism, lasted from 2003 to 2011, and overall was a massive change in the countries involved. It initially started as an invasion led by the US to topple Saddam Hussein's statue as the president of Iraq because they suspected that Iraq was creating weapons of mass destruction. The major changes were the Patriot Act, an increase in internally displaced people in Iraq, and changes to the TSA. It was also fought between the Iraq military, the Taliban, NATO, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. The Iraq War was a turning point in history because it led to widespread destruction and death in these nations and changed their regimes.